Hello, listeners. This week, C is also for cancer. I am a stage 3 cervical cancer survivor, and this is your friendly reminder that if you have a cervix or a uterus or a vagina, go get your checkups done, get them done regularly, and be an advocate for your reproductive health.
Welcome to the True Crime ABC's podcast. I'm Dani.
And I'm Sarah. Take a journey with us through our alphabet of true crime, one letter at a time.
Listen through the end of each episode for reading recommendations
and a sneak peek into what's going on in the podcast next week. This episode is supported by the letter C, and this week C is for campus. Not Krampus. Campus. Although, Krampus is a K. So, Christmas episode. Here we come. From the National Center for Education Statistics, we got some data. In 2019, there was a total of 27,300 criminal incidents reported to police and security agencies. Among the on-campus crimes that were reported in 2019, it included 11,800 forcible sex offenses, which amounts for 43% of all the criminal incidents, about 9,000 burglaries, 3,100 motor vehicle thefts, 2,200 aggravated assaults, and 800 robberies. And I wanted to be sure that I got this right, so I looked up the difference between robberies and burglaries. Robberies either include violence or the intent of violence. That's how it's different from a burglary, where a burglary is typically just something has been stolen.
Good to know.
Yeah, now we know.
So between 2009 and 2019, the overall number of reported on-campus crimes decreased by 20%. So that's promising, I suppose. So the following types of crimes decreased from 2009 to 2019, and those were burglary, motor vehicle theft, aggravated assault, robbery, and arson. So for forcible sex offenses, non-forcible sex offenses, murder, and negligent manslaughter, the number of on-campus crimes reported in 2019 was actually higher than it was in 2009.
Gross. So the really bad ones where there was more. Perfect.
Yeah. In fact, the number of reported forcible sex offenses on campus increased by 363%. So definitely going in the wrong direction on that one.
Yeah, it's a good look.
However, 2018 to 2019, forcible sex offenses did decrease by 5%. So
that's promising.
Something.
And they went down to like 0 in 2020 because nobody was at school. Hey. Another good fun times with COVID.
Oh, yeah.
Like on my list of 10 crimes and things that I absolutely, or like criminals that I wanted to do on this podcast, this is one of them. So I am going to talk about the absolutely vile crimes of one Ed Kemper.
I'm excited to have you unpack it.
So I'm going to attack it a little bit differently this time just because he is a serial killer. And I just feel like I did it more like a timeline this time so that just because there's so many people who died, and that is it's just easier to attack this way. So Edmund Emil Kemper III, a mouthful of a name and a mouthful of a man because he was 6'9".
Oh, jeez.
He's a freaking beast. Was born in California in the late 1940s. And he was pretty much kind of awful from day one. I will say his family was not great to him. And when we think about nature versus nurture, in his case, I'm going to feel like the nurture is what really messed him up. Ed's parents, Clarnell, what a name, and Edmund Kemper Jr., so his dad, had a pretty awful relationship that eventually led to divorce. His mom was actually emotionally abusive towards his dad. And then once they divorced, all of that kind of animosity fell onto little Ed. She belittled him. She humiliated him. She just really messed him up. Like, if you want a messed up kid, this is what you do. You traumatize them. Edmund's mother basically forced him to live in a basement with no windows because she was afraid he was going to sexually abuse his sisters. He had 2 sisters, which, like, quite frankly, lady, you're the reason he was this messed up. Maybe take a look in the mirror, but that's neither here nor there. So from a young age, he had sort of started some troubled behavior. He started with killing cats and dogs, mostly cats. Apparently, there's some brain research that's been done that men associate cats with women because they're, like, emotionally aloof, I guess. I don't know. So killing cats was his substitute for killing women at that point when he was young. He also was pretty gross with his sister's dolls, which I'll take that with a grain of salt because, like, what person didn't rip off their Barbie dolls and, like, light them on fire or, like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, that's what we do. Now, eventually what happened was Ed had had enough and he kind of, like, ran away to live with his dad. Well, his dad had a new family, and Ed's stepmother also was skeeved out by Ed. It also wasn't a happy household. So Ed's dad basically, like, took him to his grandparents' farm and, like, left him there to live with his grandparents. So, like, it's not hard to see why Ed Kemper was so messed up.
Yeah.
Constantly abandoned, humiliated. I mean, and with that being said, there's no excuse for what he did. There's not. But it gives us a good and a villain backstory. This is the origin story of a villain, let's be honest. It's not surprising that he ended up the way he did. In 1964, he had been living with his grandparents for a little while in North Fork, California, which is, like, kind of the middle of nowhere. He was living on a farm. He and his grandpa had a really lovely relationship. His grandpa would take him out hunting. They bought him all these guns and knives, which seems great for a troubled kid.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, Ed's relationship with his grandmother, Maud, was not so great. She was very similar to his mother in that she was belittling, kind of like a tough old broad.
I wonder where his mom got it from.
Yeah. Well, this was his dad's parents, so I don't.
Oh, yeah.
So I don't know. Like, maybe it was just what women were like in the 1940s. Like, I don't know. Who's to say? In August of 1964, Ed he shoots his grandmother with a .22 caliber rifle while his grandfather is at work or away. And when his grandpa comes home an hour and a half later, he also shoots his grandfather. So Kemper called the police on himself. I guess maybe he called his conflicting reports from my research, but he called the police and said, "I just killed my grandparents." When they got there and questioned him, they asked him why, obviously, because motive is important. And he's like, "Well, I wanted to know what it felt like to kill grandma," which is a yuck. But then when they asked about shooting his grandfather, who he seemed to really love and have a good relationship with, he claimed it was because he didn't want his grandpa to have to live with knowing his wife was dead.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, Ed, you dick.
Yeah.
Like, that's a jerk move. My guess is that maybe Ed the First, grandpa, would maybe not have been so calm, cool, and collected as to finding his wife shot by his grandson, is my guess.
Yeah.
And little Ed didn't want to deal with it. So it also makes me feel very powerful to call him Little Ed because he's a gross human and I just want to say it. Ed Kemper is the third, the youngest, the killer, is taken to a psychiatrist to be evaluated, who diagnoses him as a paranoid schizophrenic. And then Ed was sent to the Atascadero State Hospital to serve his time, basically, from killing his family, his grandparents. At Atascadero, the doctors were very confused by the paranoid schizophrenia diagnosis because he exhibited basically no signs of paranoid schizophrenia.
Oh gosh.
Which is fun. I mean, the 1960s were wild.
Yeah.
His doctors actually found him to be an intelligent and likable person. He had an IQ test. He tested in the 140s, which is extremely intelligent. He was kind of viewed as like an ally by the staff at the hospital because he's this big guy. Like, he could have been big and awful, but he was a guy who would step in and handle things, who was, calm and collected and kind, polite. And basically staff saw him as like a win. He was their rehabilitation win. Because in 1969, after 5 years of being in Atascadero State Hospital, they declared him rehabilitated and let him free.
Man, it's wild.
I know. So he was, I believe, 21 when he was let out. I mean, he was only 15 when he killed his grandparents.
Yeah,
which is, shocking. But like 5 years, even for a kid, seems for murdering two people like in cold blood and then being so calm about it just doesn't I don't know. It doesn't seem right to me, but I'm not a psychiatrist. So what do I know?
Yeah, I'm sure it was definitely just a different time, and they maybe
Yeah.
thought
Well,
that they could rehab him because
yeah.
of
And
the great behavior that he displayed.
it's California too. So they're already going to be
Hmm.
significantly more like progressive when it comes to things just because the mindset on that coast.
Hmm.
And apparently California was super big on rehabilitation at that time. Like that was the big push was
Hmm.
rehabbing inmates, getting them ready to release back into society, which quite
Hmm.
frankly is how it should be. Okay. So Ed gets out and his doctors had advised, maybe he shouldn't live with his mother.
Seems like good advice.
So he moves in with his mother.
Oh,
Uh,
perfect.
This is going to be a great situation. Ed is living with his mother, who is an administrative assistant at UC Santa Cruz. And she gets him like a parking pass so that he can come on campus and spend the day and, go to the library, hang out, do whatever. He was not a student there, but he was there every day. And the 60s and 70s were big on hitchhiking. So Ed starts picking up hitchhikers and taking them places. And at first, it starts off perfectly fine. He takes people exactly where they want to go, and my assumption is he was doing the same thing he had done at the hospital. He was
Hmm.
learning other people's behaviors,
Hmm.
figuring out how to meet their expectations.
Hmm.
He successfully got hitchhikers from point A to point B for a while before he started to get the itch. In May of 1972, Kemper picked up two Fresno State College students, Marianne Pesky, or is it Pesh? Marianne Pesh and Anita Lucchesa, who were hitchhiking. He drove them to a secluded area, he held them at gunpoint, and then stabbed them both to death. In Ed Kemper form, which this will become a recurring theme, he then proceeded to sexually assault their dead bodies before he disposed of them. He was a necrophiliac, which, again, psychologically speaking, he had a lifetime of abandonment and humiliation issues with women. I'm sure live sex for him probably would have been another point for some woman to be not satisfied, right?
Yeah.
Like the psychology tracks,
Hmm.
but it's still vile, absolutely disgusting. In June of 1972, so just a month later, Kemper picked up another woman, and I hesitate to call her a woman because she was 15.
Mm.
So Aiko Ku was a dance student who was hitchhiking. She had missed the bus and was on the way to dance class. So she hitchhiked to get to dance, which, oh, poor baby.
Mm-hmm.
So he drove her to a remote area, sexually assaulted her, murdered her, hid her body. In 1973, in January of 1973, Cindy Shaw was an 18-year-old who Kemper abducted again while she was hitchhiking. After he killed her, he decapitated her and kept her head for several days, engaging in necrophilic acts. Gross.
Yeah. Yep.
In February of 1973, Rosalind Thorpe and Allison Liu were roommates. Again, he picked them up, drove them to a secluded spot, killed and dismembered them. And then finally, Ed Kemper did the thing that most serial killers want to do. He killed the person for whom he had been substituting all the other. You know what I mean? So all the other women had been substitutions for his mother.
Hmm.
So he finally did it on April 20th, 1973, 420. He killed his mother, Clarnell Strandberg, by bludgeoning her to death with a claw hammer while she was asleep.
Jeez.
Then he called her friend over because he's like, who's going to notice she's missing? So he called her best friend over and killed her best friend, Sally Hallett, that same day.
What?
Again, bludgeoning her to death when she arrived at the house. Performed those same necrophilic acts with his mother. Just not a good guy, you know? Not a good guy.
Yeah.
So, again, I just want to read all of the victims' names because I have to say Ed Kemper's name a lot, and I'd really rather say the people who deserve to be remembered. So, his victims were Maud and Edmund Kemper, Mary Ann Pesh and Anita Lucchesa, Aiku Ko, Cindy Shaw, Rosalind Thorpe and Allison Liu, Clarnell Strandberg, and Sally Hallett. His killing spree came to an end after his mother. So, after he killed his mother, cleaned himself up, did what he did, he hops in the car and starts to drive. On April 23rd, he calls the police and turns himself in. And he basically tells them, well, he confesses to killing his mother and her friend. And the Santa Cruz Police Department thought it was a prank. Which is fair.
Of course they did.
I mean, which is fair. How many times do they get called and say, I killed these people? You know, I get it.
Yeah.
So he had to call back. And
well, I guess it's a good thing he did.
He basically called to and asked to speak to a specific police officer. I'm pretty sure it was the police officer who had maybe picked him up from his grandparents or something. It was the police officer. I watched an interview, a documentary where they interviewed the guy, and they were familiar.
Mm-hmm.
I forgot to mention something fairly important. So Ed Kemper was well known to the Santa Cruz Police Department because he hung out at the same bar they all hung out at.
Mm.
And he became like Big Ed. He was just one of their silly little buddies at the bar. Again, a nice guy, somebody who was around all the time, and they would, talk shop. And he had actually applied for the police academy, but he was too big. Like he was 6'9". Apparently, apparently that was a thing. Like he wasn't really like an obese man or anything. He was just a big guy.
Can't fit in the cruiser, or like what is the reason?
Maybe they don't make the uniforms that big. I don't know. But he was denied, so he was hanging out at this bar with the police. And in my head, I'm thinking like, well, he was listening to hear what they knew.
For sure.
They were. I'm sure they talked shop. They were talking about all these murder victims.
Mm-hmm.
There was actually another serial killer in the area at the same time, so they were just overloaded with bodies and deaths that they hadn't solved. When he called the police department, some of it was they didn't believe it because they're like, no, this is just Big Ed. What are you talking about? Like, we know him. After realizing it was not, in fact, a prank, Kemper basically told them, like, somebody needs to pick me up or I'm going to keep killing people because I can't help myself, essentially.
Jeez.
So,
self-awareness.
Yeah, at this point, he's in Colorado. So the Santa Cruz Police Department reaches out to the closest police department to where Ed Kemper is in this phone booth. And Colorado Police Department goes and picks him up and arrests him. And then Santa Cruz police officers then go to where he is in Colorado, pick him up, and drive him back. Supposedly because the airline would not permit him on board. They would not let them transfer Ed Kemper by plane, which is crazy.
Yeah.
So again, he confesses in pretty vivid detail. He talked about his grandparents' murder and then all the women he murdered. And his trial began on October 23rd, 1973. And due to overwhelming evidence and his confession, his defense attorneys were trying to go for an insanity plea. Unfortunately, psychiatrists found him totally sane. Right? They said, again, the paranoid schizophrenia came up again and sexual psychopathy, but like...
It was a surprise diagnosis even before he had done any of this to light. So I would assume it'd be easy to poke holes through that in court.
For sure. So he was found guilty on all 8 counts of first-degree murder.
Mm-hmm.
He actually requested the death penalty and asked for death by torture, which is like super metal. I mean, like, if you're going to go there. But I mean, California had a temporary suspension on capital punishment, so he just got life in prison.
Maybe he made that request because he knew there was absolutely no way that the state of California was going to do that.
That just seems like he wanted to be put in the books as the guy who asked for torture.
Yeah.
He was incarcerated at the California Medical Facility in Vacaville, California, which is where I have some beautiful family members living. Whoop whoop, hey to my fam. And he has been known his whole incarceration to have cooperated with authorities. He's a model prisoner. He even participated in psychological studies to better understand the minds of serial killers by the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit.
Of course. So he can fine tune that machine he's
Yeah.
working on.
And also, big ew here, he was a volunteer for Volunteers for Vacaville who basically had prisoners read and record audiobooks. So,
Oh my gosh.
as a fellow audiobook narrator, Vomit, that I can call him a colleague.
Oh,
but one of the books he read, and I found this so freaking creepy because these were books that I read quite a bit in my teen years. He read Flowers in the Attic and the sequel book, which makes, why did they let him read that? It's such a messed up book. And I feel like it would have fed into some of his weird sexual psychoses. Anyway, so gross. Despite his willingness, to help authorities be a model prisoner, his parole has been denied many times, and a few times I believe he even asked not to be up for parole.
Like, we'll waste everybody's time.
Yeah, like let's just not go there. We know how this is going to end.
It could have been an email,
right? My life. And he continues to serve his life sentence at the California Medical Facility.
Oh man, still alive.
Still alive. Old man, but still alive.
So did he? Yeah, there's been no death penalty because he's in California.
Yeah, California, so no death penalty. And
rot away.
And I'm kind of, I'm so torn on death penalty. Like,
another episode.
I'm not a religious person, so the God aspect doesn't really play into it for me, or like that's not a factor for me. But I'm like, my thing is like, someone can always be innocent unless we know they're not, and we know he's not. So like, let's, bullets are cheap, but maybe, I don't know. I'm so torn. I'm torn in instances where it's not a clean-cut case. But in this case, like, he's awful and he knows he's awful and he said he's awful and he's never going to not be awful. So it just seems like a drain on taxpayers' money. Maybe that's just me. I don't know. Anyway, yeah, that's our good buddy Ed Kemper.
Nice.
He's gross.
It'll be very interesting. I don't think has he been in the news since he's been in prison?
Not really.
I don't know if there's been any kind of like attacks or if he's been involved in any kind of stuff since he's been such a model prisoner.
No, I don't think so. Plus he's a real big guy, so I don't think anybody's going to mess with him in prison.
Yeah, that's fair. So my story this week is taking it back to Michigan, late 60s. This was a story that happened around the Ann Arbor, Ypsilanti area. So if you're familiar with Michigan and that area, it's a really nice area. It's a university town.
Not Ypsilanti, but Ann Arbor.
Well, yes. Listen, okay. So back in the 60s, though, I feel like it was.
It was probably better.
Ypsilanti,
known for having a massive phallic-looking tower made of brick that they call the Brick Dick. Fun fact.
Yeah, picture is actually on the cover of my book recommendation this week. So that's
yes.
For everybody out there that needs a reference, there you go. So the area, obviously, we've got a ton of campuses in the area. You've got Eastern Michigan University, which is in Ypsi. You've got Ypsilanti, Ypsi for short.
Yes, if you're from Michigan, it's called Ypsi. And then obviously University of Michigan.
So you've got University of Michigan, Ann Arbor.
Yep.
There's Wayne State and Detroit. So there's
a couple of community colleges. Yeah, a bunch of stuff.
Washtenaws down there.
Yeah.
This was not specific to a campus, but the killer in our story was a former EMU student.
Okay.
And a lot of the victims that we'll talk about today were also either students or of either U of M or Eastern.
Okay.
All right. So this started in July of 1967. So there was one particular student that was the very first victim. Her name was Mary Flezar.
Oh.
I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. But she was an Eastern Michigan student. She went out for a jog. Of course, she went missing. She was discovered 6 days later, sort of on like an abandoned farm. But she had been beaten, of course, strangled to death, sexually assaulted, the whole thing. This was obviously like super out of place for this time and the area. Definitely caught people off guard. But it was treated sort of as an isolated incident at first. Like it was
Interesting.
way out there, but there wasn't anything to sort of connect it to, and it
Right.
wasn't treated like a serial situation at this point.
Mhm.
So basically, it sort of went a little bit quiet, and then March of 68, the next year, there was the second victim. And that was Joan Shell. She was a 20-year-old nursing student,
Mhm.
and she was found near the University of Michigan. So
Okay.
she had also been strangled and sexually assaulted.
And that was almost a year apart?
So the first one was July of 67, and the
Okay.
second one was March of
Okay.
68.
So
So a
not
little bit
quite.
of a gap,
Yeah.
but so
I
then we
always
had
wonder like what was he doing in those 8 months? Like planning the next one? I don't know.
I don't
I'm
know,
glad
going on with his day. Like it's so
yeah. I'm
who
glad I
knows?
don't understand. Like I'm
Right?
but it's also, Okay, sorry. Continue.
No, perfect. So we have the third victim, which
Mhm.
was March of 1969.
Okay.
So again, almost a full year later.
Yeah.
And this one, eh, you know, she's a 13-year-old. So this
Oh.
is, yeah.
Oh, gross.
So her name was Dawn Basom. She disappeared while she was hitchhiking.
Oh my God.
Friends,
John
please don't
Bazem?
hitchhike. Yes.
Okay, so she is buried right next to my dad.
Stop.
I shit you not. Her grave is like the next grave up from my
Oh
dad's because
my
my dad is
gosh.
buried in Ann Arbor.
Oh my gosh.
Isn't that crazy? Oh my gosh,
That's
that's
so
wild.
crazy.
Rachel's my sister-in-law is going to be so excited about this because she is definitely like she's my true crime gal. She's my true crime gal pal, and she was actually the one who figured out that this girl was buried near my dad. She did like find
Oh
a
my
grave or
gosh.
something and found like a background story. Ah, that's so funny. Okay.
Nice.
Whoa, a total digression. I apologize, but I'll send you a picture of her grave. We've got one.
There you go.
Yep.
Perfect. So so Dawn, her remains were
Oh,
found a few weeks after
mm-hmm.
in a remote area again. And of course, there was signs of strangulation and sexual assault.
Ugh,
So,
poor baby.
yeah. So that was victim number 3. And I mean, after Joan, after the second victim, really it just the area went crazy. People, it was like sheer panic. Obviously the area hadn't seen anything like this.
Right.
And so that was when they started to sort of realize that, like, hey, this might actually be connected to the other one. So there was this lieutenant at the Ann Arbor Police Department whose name was Lieutenant Eugene Staudenmeyer.
Mm-hmm.
And he was the one who initially looked at the second case and realized that there could be a connection between this and the first case that they had
Mm-hmm.
seen. So he was the one who initially pulled that all together.
Yeah.
We were talking about, so we had Dawn, which was the third victim.
Mm-hmm.
Next, we had Marilyn Skelton, and this was actually 2 days after Dawn's disappearance.
Oh wow. So he's really ramping it up.
Yeah.
Or she. I'm
So,
not here to judge.
yes.
I'm
We'll
gonna
get there.
assume a
We'll
he.
get there. Yes. 16-year-old. She was 16 years old. She vanished. They, obviously went missing just like some of the other victims. And then her body was also found several weeks later. She was also kind of in a remote field, kind of farm area.
Hmm.
And she had again been sexually assaulted.
I mean, I guess it's important to like for people who aren't familiar with this area. Like these aren't just school campuses. They're not just
Hmm.
universities. Like they are actual towns. So
Hmm.
I'm assuming Dawn Bazem was 13 years old. She was not going to school at University of Michigan.
Right.
Although, okay, so my dad went to because my family is from Ann Arbor. My dad went to University High, which was the high school on University of Michigan's campus.
Hmm.
So I guess technically, yes, I guess there could be kids there, but like it's also a town. So
Hmm.
like now it's a major city, but
Yeah.
I think for people who maybe aren't familiar with it,
Hmm.
it might not make sense why there would be 13-year-olds there, but
Right. Sorry.
no, you're
I'm
good.
getting back to my notes.
I'm like looking through all my pictures. I know I took a picture of Don Basem's grave.
That's crazy. I love that.
Yeah, it's such a weird connection.
Yeah. So with Alice Callum, the pace really started to pick up. So we had Dawn and Marilyn both in March of 69. Then Alice was in June of 69. So we're
Okay.
really, really moving along here. Um,
Yeah, this guy sucks.
yeah. So she was a 23-year-old. She had also been sexually assaulted, strangled. She was found in a cemetery though, which was very, I don't know, it wasn't like the rest of the victims.
Did they think they knew for sure it was still the same guy though?
Yeah, they didn't really have anybody else in mind for it, and
Okay.
it matched so many of the other details
Sure.
with the other ones. So obviously with this many, victims, with the pace accelerating, everybody was getting desperate, like
Yeah.
obviously wanting to solve this. The town, the surrounding area, everybody was up in arms,
Yeah.
obviously.
I can't imagine being like a teenage girl in that area
No.
at that time. Ugh.
No. And one of the things about these cases is that the killer actually wanted, I mean, they say that he probably wanted the bodies to be found because all of them had been placed by the side of the road.
Right.
They were in an abandoned area, but they were still out in, enough open space that they could still be
Right.
found.
Easy to find.
So the last and the case that would actually get the killer convicted, so this is good, was Karen Sue Beneman. And she was the last known victim. So, of course, there could have been others, but she was the last known victim of our killer. John
Right.
Norman Collins is his name.
Mm-hmm.
And she was an 18-year-old. She was last seen July of 1969, and her body was found about 3 days after she went missing. So, again, she had been strangled, sexually assaulted. But John Norman Collins was actually found with her purse, which was sort of the breakout moment in the
Oh,
case.
yeah. Yes, what a
So,
friggin' dumb move, bro.
well, he probably got pretty confident at this point,
Yeah.
with getting away with so much. So you know how that goes.
People
Uh,
suck.
that was actually what the piece of evidence that was sort of the smoking gun. They were able
Yeah.
to convict him of her murder and get him a life sentence.
Mm-hmm.
So they brought charges for a lot of the other cases, but they didn't really ever go to trial, or he didn't ever get convicted for them because there just wasn't, enough evidence.
Yeah.
So, but the fact that he is serving a life sentence in the Upper Peninsula, he is still alive, and
It's
I
weird they
believe,
sent him all the way up there.
yeah, well,
Especially when there's like the high security prison not far from there.
yeah, Jackson.
Yeah.
So they were able to get him convicted. Like I said, he's up in the Upper Peninsula serving a sentence. He changed his name, actually, not the first two names. So he's still John Norman, but he's John Norman Chapman now. I don't know why he would want to change his name and
That's
maybe
weird.
distance himself from his previous name.
You're already serving a life sentence. Like, we know
Yeah.
what you did, guy.
Well, he has always proclaimed his innocence, and
Oh,
he's
how nice
still
for
to this
him.
day, um, yeah, still claiming his innocence.
Maybe some armchair detectives will find more evidence.
Yeah.
Really stick it in there.
hmm
Yeah, that's crazy.
Well, I don't know if he'll get out anytime soon.
Yeah,
Sure.
no, probably not. I can't imagine he would get parole, especially if just even the thought that it is connected to all the other
hmm
murders. There's no way.
Yeah.
Yeah, wild.
And I
I'm
don't know if go ahead.
no, you go ahead.
I don't know if you'd want to push that button, right, with all the DNA evidence and things that you could
Oh yeah,
do
no.
now. Like, you can claim you're innocent, but like, how hard are you pushing on that
Right.
to open everything back up?
Yeah. I
But,
need to like call my uncles and see because they would have been
well, yeah.
teenagers when this happened, like and in Ann Arbor. I'm
Oh
pretty sure
gosh.
my uncle was at University of Michigan when this was going on
Yeah.
because he's a couple of years older than my dad would have been.
hmm Yeah.
Huh.
I'd love to hear his take on it.
Yeah. Craziness.
hmm So there you go. A little home state tale for you this week.
Crazy. Did he have like a nickname? Was he like the co-ed killer?
Oh,
Ed Kemper?
so yeah, there were a few different nicknames he had. So he was at one point dubbed the co-ed killer, but obviously, like, there's bigger cases that took that.
Yeah.
But these were known as like the Michigan murders, or and I believe he was also known as the Ypsilanti Ripper, which is a terrible nickname. Goodness.
Firm yikes on that, Ipsy Ripper.
Yeah. But there you go. I'm at least glad that it is we had justice for one family, and at least we know where he's located for now.
There's some closure as to, even if it's not a period at the end of the sentence, at least like the sentence is over. I don't know.
Semicolon.
Yeah. An ellipses. ...
Yeah. There you go. That's better.
Yeah. Oh, that's crazy. I feel like I should know more about that. Like, I feel like I need to know more.
Okay.
But I guess, maybe it's too close to home. Like, maybe my parents didn't talk about that shit because it was like.
Did they know people? Like, did they know any of the victims?
I don't think so. I feel like, I mean,
well, they would have been teenagers. So the girls were all.
Some of them were like younger teenagers, though.
Yeah. 13, 20, 19.
I'm trying to think, like my dad, who has since passed, he knew that I always loved this stuff. I feel like if he had like an inside scoop, this would have been a story he loved to tell.
Yeah.
Because my dad was like a bomb storyteller and like loved to entertain a crowd. So I feel like this would have been information that he would have had some cool story about.
For sure.
But I don't know. But then again, maybe it was one of those like traumatic, some things happens in towns and just nobody talks about it and you're just not supposed to. And I don't know.
Well, yeah. And it was definitely one of those kind of community ripping, events. So wouldn't surprise me. Just didn't mention it.
Yeah. Crazy. That was great.
Well, thanks.
Thanks for telling me a story about the old Ipsy Ripper.
I love a good tale about Ipsy.
Yeah. Oh, Ypsilanti. We've had some good times. Book recommendations this week. Because of my Ed Kemper story, I chose the book Mindhunter, Inside the FBI's Elite Serial Crime Unit by John Douglas and Mark Olshaker. I actually listened to this on audiobook. It was really good. It describes how the FBI's Investigative Support Unit, later called the Behavioral Science Unit, started and began to psychologically profile criminals. This unit was a research-based unit, and they interviewed dozens of serial killers, including Ed Kemper, Charles Manson, and Ed Gein, who was absolutely gross. It's a show on Netflix now with the beautiful Jonathan Groff. John Douglas, the guy who wrote the book, actually is who Jack Crawford in Silence of the Lambs, that character, who he's based off of, which is kind of fun.
Oh, awesome. Very good. My book this week is called Terror in Ypsilanti.
Ooh.
It's called Terror in Ypsilanti, John Norman Collins Unmasked.
Yikes.
It's by Gregory A. Fournier. And it is about it goes into a little bit more detail around the serial killer that was in the Ann Arbor, Ypsilanti area. Bringing it back to Michigan this week.
Gotta bring it home. I mean, boo on the murders, but yay, Michigan.
Well, yeah. Of course. Next week's episode will be supported by the letter D. Check us out.
Nuts.
No. Remove it in post. We're not.
It's staying in. I would just like to reiterate that I teach 5th grade. And
I should have known better.
D's nuts. The number of times I've erased D's nuts from my desks is, if I had $1 for each time, I wouldn't have to be teaching anymore.
Oh, boy.
Ooh, okay, I'm sorry.
Next week's episode will be supported by the letter D. Check us out on social media and give us your best guesses on what our theme for next week will be.
If you'd like to hear more from us, please check us out on Instagram, TikTok, and Patreon at True Crime ABC Podcast, or email us your thoughts, ideas, and listener stories to truecrimeabcpodcast@gmail.com. And thank you, everyone, for listening.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Hope you have a great rest of the week.
Coming back again.